Commission. Today is March 15th, 2023, and this evening's meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. Clerk Aguilar, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Fry. Absent. Commissioner Havner.
Present.
Commissioner Kaiser. I see that he's here. Commissioner Kaiser, can you hear me? We'll just say that he's here if he, even though I don't think he can hear. Commissioner Milliman.
Here, present.
Commissioner Maury Bidu.
Present.
Commissioner Podar.
Present. I use she, her pronouns.
Commissioner Will.
Present.
Vice Chair Dye.
Present.
Chair Lockwood.
Present.
Okay, it looks like we have one absent. So we have 8 in attendance. We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'm wondering if Commissioner Kaiser can indicate whether he hears us. Yeah, we're not getting a response. Okay.
He's not muted.
Yeah.
All right.
Chair, this is Todd. I'm emailing him now.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll
Let's go
note
ahead.
that Commissioner Fry has joined us.
All right, may we have the director's report, please?
Yes, you may. Thank you. My name is Erin Wardell, and I'm the Planning and Development Services Manager for Washington County. Welcome to the March 15th Planning Commission meeting. As noted at our last meeting, the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association will be holding a virtual Planning Commissioner training session. It's next week on March 22nd from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. The county will pay registration fees for any of our planning commissioners who would like to attend. So if that's something you'd like to do, please let Todd Borkowitz know as soon as possible, and he will help you with the registration process. I think it's a really interesting event, and it would be probably very interesting to anyone who wants to attend it. You are also all invited to attend the county's 2023 Volunteer Appreciation event that's scheduled for Thursday, April 13th. And it will be held at the Wingspan Event and Conference Center, which is the Fairgrounds Complex, from 5:30 to 7:30. It is an in-person event. It's a pretty fun event. I remember those from back in the pre-COVID days. They have food and activities, and it's just really a celebration of you and other county volunteers who dedicate so much of your time, and we appreciate it. So we hope that you're able to join us and be celebrated that evening. Please let Todd know by April 5th if you would like to attend, and he can share the additional details about that. I have an update for the board hearing next week. On March 21st, the board will hold another hearing on engrossed ordinance number 882. That is the TSP amendment relating to the extension of Tile Flat Road. The board held engrossment hearings at the end of July and the beginning of August. At that time, Metro had still not made the decision whether or not to expand the urban growth boundary as requested by City of Tigard. The board continued the hearing to January, expecting that Metro would make their decision in the winter or fall. And Metro still wasn't quite done yet with the decision, so they continued it again. So we will be going back to them on March 21st. In that time, Metro did decide to, instead of expand the urban growth boundary, do a land swap. So they took some area in Clackamas County out of the urban growth boundary, are bringing this area into the urban growth boundary. What this means for us is that it's made the ordinance really complicated because we thought this was an ordinance affecting primarily rural land. And now we have an ordinance that once that decision has been fully acknowledged by the state, will primarily affect urban land, and that changes the way that we have to structure our findings for the ordinance. So we're going back to the board on the 21st. We'll be explaining the situation to them and asking them for an additional engrossment to reflect the changing status of the land. So we will see what the board says next week when they're reacting to this additional information. Later in this meeting, Todd will be giving an update on ordinances filed in 2021 and 2022. So we'll have some more time to talk about this at that point. I also wanted to mention another study the county is doing right now. The county is doing a comprehensive study of how we manage code compliance. Code compliance right now is distributed between land use and transportation, health and human services, and the county sheriff department. There are some benefits to having a distributed model, but there could be some benefits to having a centralized model. It's oftentimes difficult for the community to know how to report code compliance issues or who to report them to. So this is an opportunity for the county to really assess that service we provide to the community and the best way to deliver it. We expect that we'll have some significant findings in June. And so that's something that we can bring some findings back to the Planning Commission in the future if it's something you're interested in. But I would expect to see some changes to how we do code compliance based on that work. And then final update on recent board actions. We may have mentioned this particular action at the last meeting, but the board did adopt fee increases of about 50% for our current planning and building services. Those fees will take effect on July 1st. This will help us achieve cost recovery for our current planning and building services teams, and it's really important for us to maintain stable staffing. So with that, we'll talk about tonight's meeting. So on your agenda tonight, we have 2 work sessions. The first is about the consultant work that we are conducting for the significant natural resources study. We will also have our work session summarizing actions taken on ordinances filed in 2021 and 2022. And Chair Lockwood will be leading a discussion of the potential of moving to a hybrid PC meeting model. For your upcoming meetings, on April 5th, we have, I think, a really interesting work session coming to you with the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, talking about fair housing basics, a brief history of discriminatory zoning and land use, and how jurisdictions are furthering fair housing. So I think that'll be a really great discussion. I'm excited about it. This training will be about 2 hours and will be including staff from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, Washington County's Department of or Office of Community Development, and possibly some planning commissioners from partner jurisdictions at Beaverton and Tigard. And then at your April 19th meeting, we'll be talking about the long-range planning draft work program and holding a work session about that. And that is all I have for this evening.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Wardell? Yes, Commissioner Havener.
Thanks for the report, Aaron. Any legislative items that are on the county's radar for land use and development?
Oh, there are so many things happening at the legislature this year that relate to our work. The governor has made housing a priority, and so we have a number of proposed bills relating to housing, production, and regulation. So we're tracking those. There are also some bills associated with some of the other work that we regularly do in land use and transportation, and that affect the county in broad terms as well. So yes, there is a lot happening right now, and we're trying as best we can to track all of it.
And I might just add, we have asked the county's government relations manager to a future meeting to let you know more. I think it may be May before she's able to come back. So we will have a broader discussion, I think, with her at that point.
And May will be a good time, I think, to have that conversation, because right now we're still in the point of the legislative session when a lot of things have been introduced, but many of them won't go anywhere. And so it'll give us a little bit of time to see what actually has legs and what's going to be moving forward and affecting us. Although certainly some things could be resolved by May as well. So we'll see how the session goes.
Any other comments or questions? All right, thank you very much for that report. The next item on our agenda is public communication. And Clerk Aguilar, do we have anyone wanting to speak to us tonight?
We don't have anyone signed up for public communications. Would anyone in attendance like to communicate to the Planning Commission on non-agenda items? Seeing nobody, we can move on.
Okay, thank you. Work sessions. The first work session is on significant natural resources regulations update.
And Michelle Miller will give this presentation.
Okay. Good evening, Chair Lockwood and Commissioners. I'm Michelle Miller, Senior Planner in the Community Planning with Land Use and Transportation. Tonight's presentation is an overview of the Limited Goal 5 program update with a discussion on the draft public engagement plan and a status report. This project is in response to the Land Use Board of Appeals remand of the county's significant natural resource regulations and related guidelines. So we will be going over the next slide. We'll be going over the Limited Goal 5 program update, a focus look at fish and wildlife habitat, and talk more about the project timeline and decision-making structure of the project, looking at the Planning Commission's role for the project and the draft public engagement plan to get your feedback. This was emailed to you last Friday, so hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at it and then talk about next steps and where we're headed. Next slide. So last fall, we issued a request for proposals for a consultant team to help us with the remand of ordinance number 869, our significant natural resource regulations. We signed the consultant contract in January, and they have begun their work on the project. The expected project outcomes are to build on our existing inventories and available maps to update the county's significant natural resource inventory for the urban unincorporated areas. We'll make changes to the comprehensive plan policies that are consistent with our current Goal 5 policy direction. And finally, we'll have clear and objective regulatory standards for natural resources that address the state and regional requirements, as well as legal issues. Next slide. Statewide Planning Goal 5 and the rules outlined in Division 23 require the county to identify and determine protections for significant natural resources by completing a series of steps that include conducting an inventory of natural resource sites, consider the quality of the resources, identify the resource sites considered significant, and determine conflicting land uses to allow on lands with significant natural resources. And finally, the third step, developing regulations for protecting or limiting impacts to significant natural resources. Our project is called a Limited Goal 5 update because we're not starting right at the beginning of the Goal 5 inventory process, but building on existing information to update the inventory of significant natural resources. We'll then follow the other Goal 5 steps to propose updated comprehensive plan policies and development review standards that are clear and objective. Next slide, please. A little bit of details about the project. It's broken down into 4 phases of work that will follow the Division 23 process I outlined on the last slide. We are in phase 1 as the consultants are finalizing the schedule and creating the public engagement plan that you have before you this evening. Some of phase 2 is just beginning as well, with work for the consultants to do the limited inventory. I'll talk more about this work on the next slide. The major deliverable coming out of this work will be the natural resource inventory report and an updated map with significant natural resources within the urban unincorporated area. Phase 2 will include the economic, social, environmental, and energy, or ESEE analysis, which will look at the resources found to be significant, looking at the conflicting use analysis and developing an ESEE report, which will describe generally whether we will allow, limit, or prohibit development on or near the significant natural resource sites. Phase 4 is developing and refining the Goal 5 program decision, where we'll consider comprehensive plan policies and clear and objective standards for applicants to follow when they want to develop on these significant natural resource sites. Next slide. The environmental consultants are using their scientific expertise and geographic information system mapping to conduct an analysis of natural resource sites in the urban unincorporated area. They're now evaluating the mapped resources using both the maps of the county's wildlife habitat and Metro's upland wildlife habitat in the urban unincorporated area. They're developing a methodology that will identify the mapped wildlife habitat that could be considered significant, and using this methodology and their expertise, determine those sites that contain significant wildlife habitat and confirming the location of the water-related significant natural resources based on current Metro mapping of the riparian habitat. Riparian meaning water-related habitat. Next slide. The map on the left is the county's significant natural resource map from the Bethany Community Plan completed in 1984, before we had GIS, computer-generated maps, and prior to much development. The map on the right is showing the Bethany area as mapped by Metro in 2000. Highlighting a couple of things, Metro's inventory is based on the best available information at the time, combining geographic GIS mapping technology, scientific recommendations, and field work. It classified this SNRs a bit differently than the county, and by using riparian or water-related habitat areas and describing upland habitat areas that are adjacent to the riparian habitat. We're going to be using both maps when deciding whether a site contains significant natural resources. You can see from this graphic that there are areas of overlap of the resources, and you can also see where development has occurred and areas where the significant natural resources remains over time. Our consultant is looking at these maps using the different GIS layers to complete the inventory step and determining which are significant natural resources, specifically the fish and wildlife habitat. Next slide. The timeline for this 18-month project runs for 18 months through the filing of the ordinance with the proposed changes and the public hearing process being completed by the middle of next year. We're starting to get rolling on the project and wrapping up some of the tasks and deliverables in phase 1 and really diving into phase 2, the inventory work, which will take about 9 months. And the other 2 phases, the ESEE decision-making process and developing a Goal 5 program, will come at about 6 months each. So you can see from this graphic that there's some areas of overlap, and we're hoping that there can be adjustments to the timeline as we dive into the project and get going with some of the public engagement process. Next slide. So the purpose of the public engagement plan is to describe the process for the Goal 5 update. Highlighting some of the public engagement objectives are to actively seek public input from a broad, diverse audience at key project milestones and advance racial equity and ensure Washington County's approach to updating our resource program is inclusive. We want to get some meaningful public involvement opportunities and seek participation of affected and or interested individuals, neighborhood businesses, and organizations, and of course, comply with state, federal, and regional rules. So the public engagement plan identified the different groups or stakeholders that may have different levels of interest and engagement for the project, and we've considered a variety of public engagement tools to address their interests. We think that there will be groups that range from general interest to those very interested that want to follow along for a variety of reasons, and to those directly impacted parties who may be subject to the new regulation or standards, like property owners that may have significant natural resources on their site. Next slide. We are in the process of forming a technical advisory committee that that we can use their agency or groups with subject matter expertise and experience and make recommendations on the project. And the county's hearing bodies will be made up of the Planning Commission, and will give updates throughout the project, as well as hold public hearings on the proposed comprehensive plan amendments, and the Board of County Commissioners who will ultimately decide whether to adopt the proposed ordinance that has been developed throughout this process.
And Michelle, if I can stop for just a second, the slide didn't advance, so it doesn't show who all the technical, there we go, the technical advisors.
Sorry about that. There we go. Oop. Sorry, I lost my place. All right. Next slide, please. So here's the graphic that represents the decision-making structure. We have had the input from, we have the input from the technical advisors and community stakeholders with options and recommendations to county staff that filtered through the Planning Commission. And then again, through the hearing process, there'll also be community and stakeholder input throughout that process as well. Next slide. So this slide shows the different public engagement tools that are found on page 11 through 14 of the public engagement plan draft. We will have a project website that's set to go live at the end of this week, and we are beginning our community engagement activities at the end of this month to get the word out about the project. We'll also be going to various community events like farmers markets and community festivals throughout the summer at various geographic locations throughout the county. Next slide. Turning to the more active engagement tools, we plan to have technical advisory committee meetings at important project milestones. Right now, we're looking at about 3 of those type of meetings. We'll also have community forums with interested stakeholders that align with the online open house and surveys at 2 different times throughout the project. And finally, updates at work sessions with the Planning Commission at other important project milestones. So at this point, I wanted to kind of get you thinking about a couple of ideas and options for the Planning Commission to consider about public engagement moving forward with the project. So we're wondering if any of the Planning Commission members may have a special interest in this topic and would consider serving on the Technical Advisory Committee with those 3 meetings. And we'd be looking at 1 or 2 members that could be on this important committee and track the project in more detail and give feedback directly to the Planning Commission through that process. And another option is, of course, individual Planning Commission members could attend the various community forums as long as the quorum isn't filled. And as I talked about earlier, we'll be doing general updates about 5 more times before the ordinance is filed. One of these options, one option is for at work sessions to allow public comments so you can hear community concerns in real time about various aspects of the project. Next slide, and get you thinking about that. And I have some questions at the end. We can kind of talk about it later or we can pause here if you'd like to talk about some of those options for the Planning Commission. I'll wait till the next slide, it looks like. So
well, I can, I'm not sure who's all started. Was that you, Ms. Miller? Or am I interrupting you? I just wanted to say that I would be interested in serving on the Technical Advisory Committee.
Great. So this slide,
go ahead.
So this slide kind of highlights some of the public engagement tools and how they're laid out throughout the course of the project through 2023 and the first part of 2024. You can see there's different web page updates, and we'll have an interested parties list that they'll receive those updates directly. Then we have the course of the Technical Advisory Committee meetings. We'll have property owner engagement, and then tabling events that I talked about a little bit throughout the summer. Next slide. And here's some more of the different events, the community forums. I think we'll be needing 2 community forums or listening sessions. Those will kind of follow the online open house survey for those that are just more generally interested but want to give feedback. And those will be in October and February. That'll be right before before we file the ordinance with the proposed changes. And then I have the Planning Commission work sessions lined up here as well, and at the different topics that we'll be talking about at the various project milestones. Next slide. So a little bit more about Planning Commission involvement and any other, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the engagement strategies, or if you have any questions about the process moving forward. I know it can get quite technical, and some of you are new to this topic and process. So be happy to try to answer your questions, or do you have any?
I have a couple questions, but I'll defer to Commissioner Bidu if you'd like to go first.
Thanks, Chair Lockwood. Yeah, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about if there is a DEI framework that we're working under to engage historically underrepresented communities, and you know, ensuring that we're hearing the voices of all of the residents of Washington County.
Great question. One of the work that was done through the MISTIP project and the middle housing work that was done, they developed a report that kind of assessed our demographics and our equity strategies, and we incorporated that into our public engagement plan and took a look at where we might be looking to have different groups for different types of engagement that might be needed. And one of the we have from that work, we have a list of community-based organizations that we'll be reaching out to at the start of the project to see if they would like to meet with us and talk more about the project and get their thoughts on it. And then we thought we would put on the website as well a place for interested groups to let us know that they would like to have more information about the project. And then there'll also be, at the various tabling events, we plan on having Spanish interpretation as needed. The website will also be in Spanish as well, and we'll be doing Spanish interpretation of some of the materials, and some of the materials will be translated upon request. And starting with the draft public engagement plan, we are working with the Office of Equity and Inclusion. We're going to be meeting with them in a couple of weeks to get their feedback on our plan, to see if we can add any components or if we missed something in this draft to focus on as we move forward. So we're really trying to consider all of those very aspects throughout the project. An important piece of this work.
Commissioner Podar.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Michelle. Michelle, having been working with the county and having been part of seeing what the DEI strategy has been in regards to community outreach for the past couple of years, including for transportation, for land use planning and all of it. Honestly, the county doesn't seem to have a plan on hand. So none of the departments actually have a strategy, because when that question is asked that what is the DEI strategy, I think we keep going round and round in circles that we will, but we don't have a plan that these are the steps on between now and then. We are going to, the DEI office has been, is part of this, community is part of it. We do not have a community-based DEI board that is actually engaging with all of these departments, and we do not have any information on what I think ACRE, does somebody know if it is called ACRE? The DEI community board?
Yes, it is called ACRE. Yes.
So the ACRE is not what ACRE has suggested for the planning department. For the planning commission, we do not have any information about it. And frankly, when I had attended the transportation planning for transit, I think 108 or 180 people out of 700,000 people had filled in a form. 180, if I'm not over exaggerating, I think it was 108, which was quite outrageous considering that we have that many people in our county. We seem to be able to get voter pamphlets to every household, but we can't seem to get information out to people. So since we talk about a strategy, but we don't have a strategy, I would really appreciate a concrete strategy that to be brought to the Planning Commission so that we can see where the missing chunks are and help fill that in, that this is what is actually being done. And this is the exact game plan. These are the dates, these are the places. What farmers markets, which ones are they in the farmers market? Historically, we've seen it's the same people who attend every single week. So once it's been done in one farmers market, where else, in what unincorporated area? Spanish is not the only language that is spoken by people of color. Based on which unincorporated Washington County we are in, there are people who are speaking Pacific Islander languages, indigenous languages, other indigenous languages, Asian languages. So those languages are never taken into consideration. So that is part of the strategy. Also, which I'm going to put in a motion at the end of the meeting with planning commissions, the county exploiting expert advice of planning commissioners by not giving planning commission stipends, so that we can be engaged and involved at a deeper level with the community and with the planning commission, so that the time that we are dedicating to this is worthy of something. That is part of DEI strategy, that when we include planning commissioners, it is not just anybody on any given day walking in and volunteering for this commission. We are supposed to read things in advance. We're supposed to understand things, ask people questions, engage with 700,000 people, which the 9 of us are not doing or are not able to because of our lives. So all of that is also part of the DEI strategy. So when the planning department asks us that, yes, absolutely, planning commissioners should be involved and engaged in this process, but without a proper DEI strategy for the planning commissioners and the community, it almost feels like we're just still talking in the air. That's it.
Commissioner Will, I think you had your hand up.
Put my hand up again and looking for the mute button. Yeah, so I just wanted to volunteer if staff needed, in addition to Chair Lockwood, additional participation in the Technical Advisory Committee, I'd be available.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Sounds good. I had a couple questions. I wanted to clarify, Ms. Miller, that the impetus for doing this came from the Board of Commissioners, I believe. And the context is that we have materials relating to where the significant natural resources are that are dated and not really that helpful. And I'm trying to remember when we talked about this before. We're talking about urban unincorporated Washington County, is that correct?
That's one aspect of it, but the Ordinance 869 included standards that were in the urban and rural area. Our significant natural resources is all encompassing. Our focus for the inventory part is on the urban unincorporated area. but we'll ultimately be making changes to the policies and regulations in both the urban and rural areas.
Okay.
Because we have significant natural resources in both areas.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
well, and the impetus for doing this, the extent of this particular work is to address the remand of the ordinance 869. And so they gave some direction about what we need to do to make our language in our development review code clear and objective. We need to follow the Goal 5 process.
And the remand came from LUBA?
The Land Use Board of Appeals.
Yeah, right. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was around 500 acres that in total that were being talked about. Maybe that was, yeah, go ahead.
It's quite a bit more than that. I don't have the exact number. We have, in the 1980s, we developed significant natural resources for both water-related resources and wildlife habitat. And over time, those especially inside the urban growth boundary, the areas have been, some of those sites that had significant natural resources were annexed to the cities, or they may have developed, but they still have that overlay that says there's significant natural resources. So that's kind of problematic when you're trying to develop regulations on some sites that maybe don't have significant natural resources anymore. And so we don't really know how much exactly we have that's significant habitat. That's what our consultants are working on to figure that out for us. And they're using our existing habitat maps and Metro's habitat maps and kind of looking what's happened over time to see what is significant. So I don't have an actual number for that. What you might be thinking of is when we did the significant natural resource assessment and we did a real kind of very high level, there's about 300 acres of wildlife habitat that could be considered habitat kind of based on what a real high level analysis that we would be developing regulations for. And then there's another 200 acres that is likely not very developable. It might be water related resources, but it's labeled wildlife habitat because our data is so old. Right. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
And you caught my attention that you said that there might be that there would be developing rules for around allowing development on SNRs. And did I hear that correctly?
That could be one of the analysis will look to allow, limit, or prohibit. We'll get feedback on that. We likely will have what we had in the past was a limited decision. We allowed development, but they had to do certain things in order to develop on sites with significant natural resources. But it was really not clear and objective. So we foresee that we're going to kind of keep within the lane of that type of limiting decision. We allow some development, and if you read that language specifically, there's some exceptions that some things that we do allow. We allow streets, we allow overpasses, and so there's some things within the different categories that we allow. So those are allowing those uses or activity.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have questions? Yeah, I see Commissioner Podar.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Moribedu also had a question before me, but I think she dropped her hand.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bedu,
I do have a question. Thanks, Commissioner Podar. Yeah, I just was wondering about the technical advisory committee and what that role would entail. And I also just want to echo my concern about the community engagement that Commissioner Podar had previously discussed.
Commissioner Podar.
Oh, can I
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The role. Thanks.
Let's see, maybe we go to talk a little bit about the technical advisory committee. First, it would be.
Do we want to go back to that slide, Michelle?
To the slide, we could talk about slide 10, or that's kind of who would be serving on that committee. Various agencies that might have some expertise on the environmental concerns, and other regional agencies, Clean Water Services. We'll be looking to get some input from other local jurisdictions, especially as we're looking to identify significant natural resources on new urban growth boundary expansion areas. And then we may include other environmental organization, nonprofits that have subject matter expertise or interest in the project. We're still kind of filtering out who's available and seeking out getting that established. So taking those technical advisors along with county staff will meet and talk about, get feedback on some of the project reports and deliverables that will come in. We anticipate there'll be a need for about 3 meetings over the course of the entire project. One potentially in early May to talk about the inventory and process and methodology and get feedback on what our technical advisors are thinking about. And then in the fall, as we approach the different community forums to learn about, to get feedback on the ESEE analysis that's being done. And then in February, when we're closer to, I think it's February, maybe I have it in early December, excuse me, to kind of look at what are the potential code language changes that might be proposed after hearing the community forums and getting the online surveys. Our consultants are going to work to develop some code concepts and code language to get feedback on. And so that would happen in December before we go for the last community forum that would be in February, where those are refined and kind of a last check-in with the larger group of stakeholders.
Thank you.
And so I think we are thinking that it would be appropriate to have 1 or 2 planning commissioners be part of the technical advisory committee. It sounds like there is some interest, and that would be good to. I mean, we'll, as Michelle laid out, we'll be coming back and briefing the planning commission in work session 5 times over the course of the project. The technical advisory committee will get into probably some more detailed discussions and technical, some of the technical nitty-gritty of what the project is about. And so having some planning commissioners in on that, and then being able to bring that back to the full planning commission, we think would be quite valuable. So we'd probably suggest picking 1 or 2 planning commissioners that have the time and want to do that. And it sounds like there are at least a couple could be quite useful for that.
Commissioner Podar and then Commissioner Fry.
Thank you, Teresa. Again, going back to the same comment, it is not an equitable way because not all of us can afford, even if we want to serve, we cannot afford to serve on the commission. So only those planning commissioners who have probably other sources of income or who have supportive income are probably going to be able to serve on that committee. It is not an equitable way to volunteer, especially since just somebody cannot go and serve on these committees. So I would highly encourage my fellow planning commissioners to refrain from serving on the committee without demanding an equitable manner in which all of us are able to serve, and then deciding who wants to serve. I think that would be a better strategy, because unless we, at this moment, arm twist the county commissioners to create an equitable strategy, it will not happen. We are not just representing ourselves. We are trying to set the precedent for all future planning commissioners, so that this board can truly represent the entirety of the county and their circumstances without by acknowledging our own privileges that we are able to be here. Secondly, there was a mention that we will be approaching some community-based organizations. Historically, I have seen it's the same 7 to 8 community-based organizations that are constantly tapped into by the county because it's an easy way out. It's the same Centro Cultural, Adelante Mujeres, Unite, Apano. It's the same 7. When half, they don't even have access. They are only just now, most of them establishing presence in the community, and they're mostly focused in their own geography. None of these organizations actually encompass the entire county or represent the entire county. They do not have a presence there. I have worked with all of these organizations, but county needs to do a far more thorough job of going beyond the same old 7 and trying to get hear from other community members and other organizations. It will take effort, but equity demands effort. Lastly, when we're talking about 50% of the county living in unincorporated counties, so when we say that we are going to reach out into the community to get their feedback, what I would love to know, what is that number at which we will be satisfied by saying we did our best to reach into the community. We tried, and this is what the number, these many people responded, and that satisfied our main goal of getting diverse voices, not the same old voices who have privilege, power, access, ability to respond to surveys online. But did we do an adequate job? What is that number at which we will say we are satisfied? Is it 500 community members? Is it 1,000 community members out of the almost 450,000 community members that live in unincorporated Washington County? Thank you. I would love for somebody to talk about that.
I just have a kind of a quick question, Commissioner Podar. Did you have any groups that you are especially, you think that would be interested in learning about the project? Or you know, you mentioned the seven groups. If you have a different set of groups, I'd love to hear those, or you can send me an email, and be happy to reach out to those groups. If you know, a lot of the other comments that you made are very valuable, and I'm sure that there's people here that are interested in hearing and responding to those as well.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Just 1 second. Sorry, Michelle, for interrupting. Michelle, I would love to get on the phone and talk to you about those other options, but I would also love to encourage our planning commissioners, if they have suggestions about organizations or groups that would like that, you know, we could county potentially reach, if they can all send that and we can put that in one document, that would be amazing. Any suggestions, any organization or group that they have ever worked with or heard of, so that way we can have some sort of community approach list rather than just county based list. Thank you.
And I think I heard a valuable a comment would be to have some sort of matrix or way of measuring success of our public engagement plan. And so I think that would be important to note and to consider.
Commissioner Fry.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that I would be interested in participating because I do think this is important work that's going to have a lot of impact on our community and current landowners who are going to be impacted by this for their own property, but the quality of life for our whole community. I'm not sure if I can fully commit to being at every meeting and whatnot, but I would like to try and be involved and help whenever I can.
Great. Thank you.
And one of the plans is for there to be at least 2 community forums. And so that may also be a place, if not on the technical advisory committee, participating in the forums. And our hope is that those could be in person. So for people who, there are different ways, I guess, to be involved through the process besides just when we'll come to the planning commission. There'll be the community forums, the technical advisory committees, and we'll have online open house. So there'll be the ability to do, we usually have a survey with the online open house. So there'll be different ways to participate throughout the process.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Miller.
And there's one tiny little bit left, right? Michelle, you had one little update still to do. The next slide there.
Right. So you may recall that a resident, Washington County resident, filed a petition to the Land Conservation and Development Commission requesting an enforcement order against the county. And we had an oral argument with a hearings officer appointed by the LCDC. And that oral argument was on February 15th. And they actually came down with a recommendation to the LCDC on whether to issue an enforcement order and a stay on future development sites with SNRs. And so that came down today. Haven't really had a chance to dive in and look at that. So I don't have too much to add, but LCDC will be making their final decision at the April 20th. It's been set for that time on whether they will be issuing an enforcement order and a stay. And next slide. So I'll be returning to the Planning Commission in June with further information on the inventory status update, talk a little bit more about the ESEE methodology that we'll be using and what we've been hearing so far about the project, and more updates on the enforcement order as needed. I was just kind of thinking the intro should get have a name or get a couple of names for the technical advisory committee. It sounds like there's some great interest, and I appreciate that. Teresa, have you?
Yeah, so Chair Lockwood, it's
Chair Lockwood.
I'm not sure how you would like to approach that. It looked like both yourself and Commissioner Will indicated interest in the TAC, and so if you want to see if there's consensus on the Planning Commission that you would be kind of the representatives.
And I thought Commissioner Fry also indicated interest, although I think you were saying you couldn't necessarily commit to going to every meeting.
Yeah, I'm just worried. I'm worried I might have some conflicts with some kind of big events that are going on around those times, but I would like to have opportunity where I can because I do think it's really important, and I think I bring a perspective from the development community that kind of brings a little different angle that than some others might have. So I'd love to hear about it.
So does that work for you all, Ms. Cherniak and Ms. Miller, to have?
Yeah, I think our preference would be to have the people appointed who would be able to commit to going to all the meetings and reading the materials and such, but we could definitely send materials out.
Right.
And there could be input.
Keep Commissioner Fry in the loop, kind of,
yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, there also, Michelle, I don't know if it showed up on the slide, but we had talked about having someone from representing the Home Builders Association on there, so that there is the full range of people who would be potentially affected too. So not only the environmental community, but the building community.
So are there objections or comments from other commissioners? Does this plan sit well with you all? Commissioner Havener, did you have a comment?
I'm just supportive of the two interested planning commission members that want to be part of the TAC.
Thank you. Commissioner Will.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to comment that I was thinking about what if I missed a meeting or whatever, Commissioner, so is it Frey or Fry? I'm sorry.
Sorry, it's Fry, yeah.
Fry, yeah. Could also cover for us if something comes up and we can't make it. So that, I would think that might be a good way to make sure he gets involved. But I'd encourage all of the commissioners to look at the open house and the community events and just attend those as well when possible.
Good point. Commissioner Bidu.
Yeah, kind of going along with that, I was just wondering if we might be able to all be kept in the loop with the documentation information so that if we have, questions, we can maybe deliver them to Chair Lockwood or Commissioner Will to have those represented in the meetings.
Any other comments? All right, I'm seeing none, so thank you. Our next work session is summary of actions on 2021 and 2022 ordinances. That's Mr. Borkowitz, correct?
That's correct. I am just waiting for the PowerPoint. Chair, is my volume okay?
Yes, it's fine for me.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry, guys, we're getting there.
No worries. Great. Thank you, Chuck. So hello, Planning Commission members. I'm Todd Borkowitz, Associate Planner in Community Planning with the Department of Land Use and Transportation. And I'm here today to review actions on LUT ordinances that were filed in 2021 and 2022. Next slide. Staff aims to occasionally update the PC on recent ordinance actions. When an ordinance is brought to the board, staff shares the PC's deliberations, recommendations, and votes on the ordinance. And while the board often adopts an ordinance per the PC's recommendation, the board sometimes orders other engrossments after the last PC hearing on the ordinance. This presentation is an opportunity to circle back to the PC and communicate the resolution of ordinances that came before it. This presentation is not really intended as a deep dive into details of any one ordinance. A more detailed document on this ordinance summary will be posted afterwards on the PC webpage. Rather, this is a presentation that is intended as a broader overview of the PC's recent work to illustrate how PC recommendations inform and influence county policy decisions. Some ways, this is a celebration of the PC's work in refining filed ordinances and ensuring that community voices are heard and considered. Next slide, please. So as a brief refresher, these are the steps for processing an LUT ordinance. An ordinance makes changes to the county's state acknowledged comprehensive plan documents, which include the Community Development Code, Comprehensive Framework Plan for the urban area, the Rural Natural Resource Plan, the Transportation System Plan, community plans, and urban planning area agreements, as well as comprehensive plan maps associated with these documents. In this process, an ordinance is identified in the board-approved long-range planning work program, then developed by staff. The completed ordinance is then filed with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Public hearings on the ordinance are then scheduled, noticed, and held at the PC and the board. And the PC makes a recommendation, typically, on the ordinance to the board. Staff then shares with the board the PC ordinance deliberations, recommended action, and vote. Staff may occasionally accompany the PC's recommendation with a differing staff recommendation. The board then votes to approve, reject, or engross the filed ordinance. Engrossment requires additional public notice hearings, and engrossment ordinance typically does not come back to the PC. And if adopted, an ordinance typically becomes effective in 30 days. Comprehensive plan documents are then amended accordingly. And onward to the ordinances. Next slide, please. So in 2021, 5 LUT ordinances were filed. All came before the PC. They included a rural omnibus to better align comprehensive plan documents with state statute, a needed update to an urban planning area agreement, or UPAA, with the city of Tigard, and then 3 updates to the transportation system plan, or TSP, to enable future planning efforts. Next slide, please. So I'll begin with Ordinance 877, the Rural Omnibus. This ordinance aligns aspects of the Community Development Code, or the CDC, with state statute. I won't go into too much detail on this, but it largely made clarifications on allowances in specific rural land use districts. Staff's recommendation for engrossment made additional minor clarifications on the proposed changes in the filed ordinance. Next slide, please. The PC supported the filed ordinance and proposed engrossment and voted unanimously to recommend the engrossed ordinance for board adoption. The board later adopted the engrossed ordinance as recommended by the PC by unanimous vote. Next slide. Ordinance 879 updated the UPAA between the county and Tigard. These agreements serve as a basis for governmental coordination on planning in the urban area, as required by statewide Planning Goal 2. Tigard's UPAA was last updated in 2003. Since then, River Terrace was added to the urban growth boundary, and it was annexed by Tigard, and River Terrace West was later designated by Metro as an urban reserve area. This ordinance updated the UPAA to enable River Terrace West concept planning needed to bring the area into the UGB and eventually be annexed. It allowed coordination on a tile flat road extension, added urban reserves to the Tigard urban planning area map, and made other minor updates. Next slide, please. The PC supported the staff recommendation and voted unanimously to recommend the filed ordinance for board adoption. The board later adopted the filed ordinance as recommended by the PC by unanimous vote. Next slide, please. Ordinance 881 is the first of 3 ordinances to amend the TSP that came before the PC in 2021. These amendments are generally needed to enable high-level planning to move forward on areas identified for future growth. Next slide, please. The PC supported most of the filed ordinance, but recommended by a 5-to-1 vote that the board engross the ordinance to remove the adoption of a planning level alignment of 185th Avenue extension as a collector. Staff supported the PC's proposed change and recommended the filed ordinance with the PC proposed engrossment to the board. The board later adopted the engrossed ordinance as recommended by the PC by unanimous vote. Next slide, please. Ordinance 882 would amend the TSP relating to the extension of Tile Flat Road. While filed in 2021, this ordinance, as indicated earlier in the director's report to the PC, is still in the legislative process and has not yet been decided by the board. The filed ordinance proposed to add an extension to Southwest Tile Flat Road to the TSP and to take an exception to 4 statewide planning goals to allow the TSP to include a new roadway outside the UGB, a requirement for planning in the rural area. Next slide. The PC received testimony that was mostly critical of this ordinance, and after deliberating was unable to approve a motion to recommend ordinance adoption to the board. Staff informed the board of the PC deliberations and recommended board adoption of the filed ordinance with engrossment to add policy language identifying the need for the roadway and a goal exception analysis as a technical appendix to the TSP. The board continued the public hearing and delayed a decision on this ordinance until an anticipated UGB land swap, including the subject area, was approved by Metro. This February, Metro actually approved that land swap, and staff is now proposing a B engrossed ordinance to remove the goal exception analysis. The next board hearing on this ordinance is scheduled for March 21st, and so stay tuned. Next slide, please. So similar to the previous ordinance, only for a different area, Ordinance 883 would amend the TSP relating to the extension of Cornelius Pass roadway. The filed ordinance proposed to add an extension of Cornelius Pass roadway to the TSP and take an exception to the same 4 statewide planning goals. It also proposed to adopt a roadway spacing standard consistent with Metro rules. Next slide, please. Again, the PC received testimony that was mostly critical of this ordinance, and after deliberating was unable to approve a motion to recommend ordinance approval or ordinance rejection. The staff informed the board of the PC deliberations and recommended board adoption of the filed ordinance with the proposed engrossment to add policy language identifying the need for the roadway and add a goal exception analysis as a technical appendix to the TSP. Excuse me. The board received additional testimony that was also critical of this ordinance and rejected it by a 3-to-1 vote. Next slide, please. Now we're on to 2022. So last year, 4 LUT ordinances were filed. All of them came before the PC. They included the 2 middle housing ordinances to align the comprehensive plan documents with House Bill 2001 rules. There was a minor amendments ordinance. And lastly, there was a middle housing land divisions ordinance to align the CDC with Senate Bill 458 rules. Next slide, please. And so many of you remember, I hope you remember, Ordinance 885. It proposed to amend the CDC to implement HB 2001 middle housing provisions. This was a complex ordinance that came before the PC a total of 14 times, including 4 hearings and 10 work sessions. I think I did that math right. So, the ordinance focused on changes to the CDC to define middle housing duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses. It added middle housing as an allowed use in all urban residential districts. It made consistent requirements for single detached dwellings with middle housing. It added unique requirements specific to middle housing per state statute. And while it focused on HB 2001, the ordinance also proposed to codify SB 458 middle housing land divisions. Staff's recommendation for engrossment made further minor clarifications and changes to the filed ordinance. Next slide, please. The PC supported most aspects of the filed ordinance and staff's proposed engrossment. The PC unanimously approved these with additional changes to allow detached duplexes, delete a proposed sidewalk requirement for single detached dwellings, certain expansions in middle housing, and eliminate the middle housing garage design standards. The board later adopted the engrossed ordinance as recommended by the PC by a unanimous vote. Next slide, please. While the previous ordinance amended the CDC to implement middle housing, Ordinance 866 codified these provisions in the CFP. Specifically, the ordinance proposed to amend several CFP policies, implementing strategies, and summary findings and conclusions. It proposed to clarify that policy 19 for infill housing is not applicable to middle housing, and deleted some outdated information in policy 24, housing discrimination. Staff proposed engrossing the ordinance to make minor additions and clarifications. Next slide, please. So the PC voted 6-1 on the filed ordinance. Staff's proposed engrossment and a PC proposed change to omit some policy language regarding North Bethany sub-area planning. The board later adopted the engrossed ordinance as recommended by the PC by unanimous vote. Next slide, please. So ordinance 889 proposed minor changes to the CDC, the CFP, and the Bethany Community Plan. Specifically, the ordinance proposed to amend language in the CFP relating to UGB expansions, clarified standards for side yard maintenance easements in the urban residential districts, add a new type 1 setback adjustment process, and made other minor updates. Staff proposed engrossing the ordinance to make minor changes and additions. Next slide, please. So the PC approved by a 5-0 vote with 2 abstentions the filed ordinance. Staff's proposed engrossment and a PC proposed change to omit some policy language was done. In a recommendation to the board, staff proposed omitting the previously proposed type 1 setback adjustment process based on feedback from the current planning group. The board later adopted the engrossed ordinance with this change, but otherwise, as recommended by the PC, by unanimous vote. Next slide, please. And lastly, and most recently, Ordinance 890 proposed to amend the CDC to primarily implement SB 458 middle housing land division provisions. This ordinance was somewhat intertwined with Ordinance 885 adopted earlier to implement HB 2001 middle housing provisions. The ordinance focused on changes to the CDC and proposed to clarify middle housing land division, or to clarify a middle housing land division and differentiate other types of land divisions as standard land divisions, and clarify that standard land that the standards differ for each. It added requirements, review processes, and plat recording procedures for middle housing land divisions per SB 458. Next slide, please. The PC approved by a 5-1 vote and 2 abstentions the filed ordinance and PC proposed changes to side yards for middle housing land divisions and other housing, and for some housing, allowing approved road improvements that were previously built to county standard as an alternative to minimum right-of-way standards. The board later adopted the engrossed ordinance as recommended by the PC by unanimous vote. So you probably heard some themes there. Anyhow, those were the ordinances. Some key takeaways to note. The number of hearings really correlated with complexity. Here's a breakdown of the number of hearings for each ordinance. Work sessions helped answer questions, or we believed helped answer questions, and addressed, hopefully addressed PC concerns. And the board supported nearly all PC recommendations on ordinances filed in 2021 and 2022.
And Todd, it didn't advance to the next slide. There we go.
Oh, there we go. I'll just sit here for a moment so you can just kind of see the 5 ordinances had 1 hearing, 2 ordinances had 2, and then 1 had 3, 1 had 4. I'll let you guess which ones those are, and if you need the answers, they're right there, I guess. Anyhow, next slide. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. Berkowitz or comments? Yes, Commissioner Will.
I don't have any questions other than this is just culminating on my first year on the Planning Commission, and I want to thank the staff for providing this. It helps provide some context for myself, who's relatively new, and I'm sure for others that are more new. So thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, the next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes. And we've got two sets of minutes. One is January 18th, 2023. Are there any corrections that anyone has for this set of minutes? I'm not seeing any. I don't have any. Is there any objection to approving the minutes for January 18th, 2023? Without objection, the minutes are approved. Next, the minutes for February 15th, 2023. Does anyone have any corrections for that set of minutes? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Is there any objection to approving the minutes for February 15th, 2023? Without objection, the minutes are approved. All right, the next item on the agenda is discussion of hybrid PC meetings. And I've talked or communicated with each of you over the last week or so, some of you by phone and some of you by email, about this subject of hybrid meetings. Now that the pandemic has eased, we can go back to meeting in person if we choose. Hybrid meetings mean that you have the option to participate in person or virtually. So our choices are virtual meetings and hybrid meetings, either those two. When I communicated with each of you, it was because I wanted to get an idea of what was important to you. And thank you all for your comments. They were helpful to me. But before we go further with figuring out how we'd like to meet over the next year, I thought it would be helpful if each of you briefly shared your view or your preferences about virtual and hybrid meetings. Is there anyone who would want to start us off on that? Commissioner Will.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. I am very open. So when I volunteered, I imagined all of the planning commission meetings would be in person. So I'm prepared to go in person. I do see some convenience to having virtual. So I'm prepared for the hybrid. That way, as people who can't make it in person still have that option.
Right. Thank you very much. Commissioner Kaiser. Can't hear you. I think you're unmuted now. Oh, still can't hear you. I'm not sure what's the matter.
Might possibly be his microphone on his end. Sometimes you have to turn that on as well. I'm not sure.
The source of the microphone might be different as well.
Commissioner Kaiser, you think it's okay? Commissioner Vidu.
My opinion is I am open to in-person meetings going forward. I think it's really helpful to collaborate in person. However, I have a preference for the daytime meetings to be available in hybrid form because it is difficult to get away during the workday at certain points.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in? Commissioner Milliman.
I have a preference for the virtual meetings. It saves the commute and it works just as well. So as long as there's a hybrid option, I would prefer that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kaiser?
Trying this again. Does that work?
Yes.
Yay. I only have 4 different microphone options apparently on my computer. Anyway, for me, the hybrid is a better option. I unfortunately spend a great number of evenings in HOA meetings, which, as you can imagine, are only moderately torturous. So I prefer to be able to have some flexibility there. So just the hybrid option is great for me. When I can be in person, I will be.
Okay. Commissioner Kodar.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. My preference would be virtual as well, virtual hybrid once in a while to be in person, but virtual. I have a small business, and that means that if I have to travel for 30 minutes to get to Washington County offices, I have to shut off, close my business down early in the evenings, and daytime is impossible right now because I don't have employees anymore. The pandemic took that opportunity away. So it's a financial reason as well as a time factor also. Also, if we can avoid driving cars as much as possible, considering we are looking at emissions, whatever we can do to make things convenient. And I think I'm able to see all of your faces much better like this versus that dais where we can't see each other. And so it's easy to see sometimes some expressions as well. And but I would prefer virtual as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Havener?
Yeah, as I shared with you the other day, I'm supportive of in person. I think hybrid offers an option. Why I don't believe that it should be the default. It does create a convenience for schedule conflicts, et cetera. And so, like we've heard from some of our other commissioners, I support the in-person as the primary.
Okay. Commissioner Fry.
Thank you. I have a different maybe perspective from some people because when I joined here recently, I was told that everything was virtual. That it would likely stay that way, but it could shift back. And I'm not particularly passionate one way or the other about what we do. I think that the virtual option is important sometimes because it is hard. We can't always get away and make it. Different factors, different days, or for different people can make it. So virtual really opens up the opportunity for them. But I do see great value in meeting together and being in person sometimes. So I think my preference would be keeping the hybrid option and then having, trying to have a focused time where quarterly or something along those lines, we try and make sure that we all make an effort to be together at least a couple times a year, even if we can't do that every month.
Thank you. Let's see. Commissioner, Vice Chair Dye.
Yes, I can chime in and just say that I would appreciate the option to join virtually and to open up the space that we have in the county core for people that are able to participate in person. For me, it is a bit of an onerous drive late at night coming back from Hillsborough, and just rather avoid having to do that necessarily. Weather's not always favorable. Sometimes it gets really dark, and it's just it's just a personal safety hazard to do that. During the day, having an hour commute, it's difficult to jump in the car and drive 90 minutes to Hillsborough to make a one o'clock meeting. And so continuing to have the option to log in from where I am is certainly more convenient. And I think about the public participation option because I can imagine I've just seen over the couple of years the public testimony that's happened, and people are able to kind of jump in, they're on their phone and they're in their house and they give their 3 to 5 minutes of testimony, and then they either stay or go back to their lives. And I think it's puts a little bit more pressure on people to stop what they're doing and to make it to Hillsborough and to, basically spend a couple of hours maybe in commute time if they're on public transit to talk for 5 minutes and then go back to do it all over again to get back home. And, there's something that's just not fair about that. If we have a way for people to participate without putting them through so many hoops, I just want them to be able to do that. Those of us who are fortunate enough to have, transit and vehicles, we can easily make it there and find parking. But I know there's lots of other people that may have concerns that may have to take a couple of buses and a train to do that. And so if we can just, make sure that we have virtual participation options open, that would be ideal.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Chair Lockwood, I have one last thing. Sorry, I raised my hand.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So also Washington County is a transit desert. So we don't have, while Washington County offices have access to public transit, for people to get to public transit to take the tram, but to take the train to Washington County is impossible. I do not have any access to public transit, considering my car is out of order most of the time. So it is not possible for me to take public transit to go to places because we don't have any. Thanks.
All right, I'm the only one who has not weighed in yet, and I served for 3 years in person before the pandemic hit, and so I've now served 3 years more. Most of that was virtual because of the pandemic, and so my perspective is, as far as the quality of the meetings, I don't really feel there was a difference between the quality of the meetings between virtual and in person. I think I too like being able to see people's faces, which we can see. Is kind of ironic that we can see each other online, but when we're together, we're on a dais and we're looking forward out onto that seating for the audience, which is usually empty. And I do feel like the commute is, it's just an extra commitment to people that people have to make to put in that time to get to downtown Hillsborough. But I'm hearing a lot of interest in meeting in person, as well as a lot of interest in having the virtual participation always an option, or in a hybrid meeting would do that. The meeting would be in person, but you'd have the option to meet virtually. So did you want to comment, Commissioner Bidu?
No, you should finish first. Sorry.
Okay. So I'm thinking we might move towards having several in-person meetings a year. I think where I am is pretty close to what Commissioner Fry was saying, that we'd have several in-person meetings a year, not every month, but perhaps quarterly. So we'd get a chance to be together, but on the other hand, we'd also not always need to find the time to get to Hillsborough in person. Yeah, and so Commissioner Bidu had her hand up, and then Commissioner Fry.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I don't want to be one of, 2 people in person. I don't find a lot of value in that. So I really like the idea of, having a few meetings per year where attendance is encouraged.
Right.
People are able to attend rather than, going every time and being the only one there in person.
Yeah. Commissioner Fry.
I just had a question. I was thinking, me, when I was like, what works well for me? It was But is there a difference in the burden to staff? Do staff have to be there regardless if, or is staff always there? Is staff there right now, no matter what we're doing? And how does that work? Because I would like to be aware of that as well.
Staff are not there right now when we have a meeting like this that's virtual. Most of us are also virtual. We do sometimes run IT from our auditorium. Sometimes that needs to be done that way. So occasionally we have an IT person on site. But staff will do what the Planning Commission wants to do. So please don't take that into consideration. This is about you and what works for this commission.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. Any other comments? Commissioner Will.
I feel it's also helpful for us as commissioners to have a pattern, or so we can plan our lives. And so, if there was this idea of doing it quarterly in person, it'd be nice to set that pattern. And so then if there was the off months was hybrid, and then the other month was virtual or something, that would be easier to plan. So if there was an idea to have, January's virtual, February's hybrid, March in person, April virtual, like that, I would rather see it fixed than have to wait to read an email to decide what the status is on the next month. Is it going to be virtual next month or in person or next month? I don't know. So
yeah, I was thinking about that too. And complication I thought of was when we get meetings canceled. And do we flex so that we can have an in-person meeting that's not on a set schedule, because otherwise we just miss that meeting entirely. I don't know if staff has any input on this, but it just seems that we don't have that much lead time to know when a meeting is going to be canceled. So yeah, I see someone saying, Commissioner Kaiser.
Jeez. Okay. So just to add some comments here, I guess, the daytime session would always be easier with the virtual option for probably most of us, I imagine. And if we were going to do a couple of set or 3 or 4 set meetings a year, I like the quarterly option. I like them in the evening, and I think would be my preference anyway, if we're going to do that, those be meetings where we expect to hear some testimony, or we expect to have some significant involvement at the commission, rather than say just a work session meeting. Seems like it would be more valuable to have that time used for testimony. And by the way, as the new guy, I don't know how much testimony we ever get, but if we do get any, that might be the good time to use it, or to make sure that we are setting an agenda that's fairly significant for the in-person meetings.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that if we're considering an ordinance, that would be a good time for that, to make sure it's a hybrid meeting. So I thought I'd call on Vice Chair Dye and then Ms. Cherniak. Does that work for you? Okay, Vice Chair Dye.
I guess as I'm listening to this, I'm trying to figure out if we're I'm trying to figure out what problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
As someone who has never, I've attended one meeting in person, and that was the most recent meeting, but I've always served virtually, and I don't remember there be a problem over the last couple of years that we've done this, that there's a need for us to go rushing back to Hillsborough for some reason. And I'm just trying to figure out why we're, trying to put a burden back on people that we were able to alleviate over the last few years. For what end? I mean, is it, I don't plan on being personal friends with anyone here. I don't plan on commiserating and sharing a drink and all that in person. I mean, I'm here to do the business of the Planning Commission, and I'm doing that sitting where I am without having to drive an hour and a half to do that. So what else are we trying to solve by us being in the same room that we're not able to do in the way that we've done it over the last few years successfully?
Question will be, keep that question in mind, and but first hear from Ms. Cherniak.
Okay, yeah, because I can't answer that question.
Yes.
But on the idea of scheduling, I think we could definitely do a schedule out, sort of plan things even over the course of a year, and we could use that as much as we could to schedule things that were of substance on those, say if you were going to do it quarterly or 2 times a year. The ordinances, we probably couldn't always plan those ahead like that, but we could definitely plan substantive topics for work sessions. And if we knew that there were going to be in-person meetings, we could gear our work toward that for the work sessions to make sure that there was enough of substance. And we could try on the ordinances, but those sometimes come when they have to come.
Right. Okay.
No.
Ms. Podar, Commissioner Podar, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
I want to uplift everything that Vice Chair Dye just said, that it seems like they're adding more confusion to our lives as the chaos. If I would love to meet all of you, we can meet in May and November just as an informal gathering without the Planning Commission, just as a networking event to meet each other and say hello. But again, if people are traveling, if people are in different parts of the country or doing something, it would be difficult. So in person would be, I can pretty much say almost an impossibility for me at this moment. But it seems like if we start as the county just said that what do you call it? We can't plan our ordinances. Like we just said that we had 10 listening sessions for one of the ordinances. So we can't plan when the community will come and how do we cater, because if we have to push discussions to the next meeting, then we just have to keep doing that. So it makes things more, I think it makes things more complicated for community as well. We have to take into consideration that if it is virtual, it's virtual, everybody knows it. And so that's how they plan for it. If they want to go to the county and give testimony, they can in person. But otherwise, once community knows that it's virtual, it's easy for us to even ask the community to chime in. Otherwise, we will have to tell them, oh, you can do this and this and this, and they don't know which one will be more effective. So how do we just keep things simple and just roll with that? Thanks.
Now, I'm not sure if Commissioner Kaiser or Commissioner Bidu had their hand up first. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bidu.
I think I was second, actually.
Okay. Were you making this too? I didn't. Okay, Commissioner Kaiser.
Okay, I was just going to say to Commissioner Dye's point, what is the impetus for wanting to go back to this other than the pandemic ending? I guess I just assumed there was a general feeling that people wanted to go back to it. I certainly am fine with not going back to it, but I also do understand the having been a city councilor, I spent a lot of years in meetings, and there's something to being in person. I get that. I do understand what Chair Dye is saying, and just want to be clear that I'm okay with staying virtual. I just didn't understand where this was coming from. It doesn't sound like staff's all that thrilled about it. And could people just comment? That'd be great.
Well, staff is going to just accommodate whatever suits us. So it's really our decision. Commissioner Bidu.
I don't want to, just because I have a personal preference to be in person some of the time, I don't want to push that on anybody. I just want to make that really, really clear that I find that it is really important to have the virtual option. I wasn't suggesting not having a virtual option. I was assuming that it would be a choice to be in person and always a virtual option. I find that it's a really important equity issue to include a virtual option for not only individuals who aren't able to attend, but just access to hearing more community members. So I just want to let everybody know that I'm not pushing in any one direction. If people have really strong feelings, I am totally okay with the flow of the group.
Okay, Ms. Cherniak.
And I would just say that it is state law now that we provide at least a hybrid meeting so that the public has the opportunity to participate virtually. So at the least, we would always be providing that.
No, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay. Back to Vice Chair Dyke's question. What problem are we trying to solve by meeting in person? I think we don't know, because of the last 3 years as a group, we don't know what difference it makes to meet in person. If I'm writing a list of who's in favor of virtual, participating virtually, I'm on the list. But I also want to show deference to the people who are interested in having the opportunity to meet in person. And a hybrid meeting preserves always the option to participate virtually. So it's not like anyone will lose the opportunity to participate if we have a hybrid meeting. I am a little worried about something Commissioner Bidu brought up, which is coming into Hillsborough for the meeting in person and having, 2 or 3 of us there, because that's what seems to, just the way things are, that it doesn't really work for most of us to make the commute in. So I'm wondering if maybe we need a motion to sort of sort this out. If we're coming to consensus is one way to do this, another would be to have a motion. Commissioner Podar.
I would like to make a motion to hold the meeting virtually with, hold the meeting.
Okay, so am I understanding that you're saying your motion is that planning commission meetings will be hybrid?
Virtual.
Sorry, backwards.
Virtual to keep it.
Yeah, planning commissions will be, meetings will be virtual.
Just to keep it simple.
Yeah, that's a nice, simple, thank you, simple motion. Is there any second for that motion? Commissioner Kaiser?
Teresa, did I hear you right? We technically have to provide an option for hybrid anyway, right?
We need to provide the option for the public to participate virtually. Yeah.
Okay. So would it be inappropriate then to go with, we probably don't want to make a motion for virtual if that's the case, or does it even matter if we're just talking about us specifically? I just want to make sure we're getting the terminology right.
And maybe I could intervene here a bit. The choices really are only 2: to do everything virtually or to have a hybrid meeting and allow everybody to participate virtually if that's what they want. So there really are only 2 choices. If we were a very small public entity that didn't even have virtual capacity, there's an escape clause in the new statute, but that's not Washington County. So our only 2 choices really are hybrid or virtual. I think we have a motion on the floor to keep the PC at virtual. And it hasn't been seconded yet. I just want to point of order and clarify where we're at here.
Thank
So
you.
if there is a second to it, that would be helpful. If somebody does want to second it, then we can have deliberation around the motion, because right now we're just talking about the motion itself.
I'll second
Right.
it for the sake of deliberation.
Thank you. So it's been moved that to have the PC meet virtually only. And it's been seconded. Discussion.
Chair Lockwood, my hand is raised. I would like to.
Oh, sorry. I'm
just
sorry.
a short discussion.
Yeah.
The fact that I support the motion and I appreciate the second by the commissioners. I would recommend anybody who wants to have an in-person meeting vote yes for this motion and then propose an in-person meeting when it's recommended. So like if in next August we want to do an in-person meeting, make a motion in June or July and put it on the calendar. So I'm going to support this motion.
Okay, so I want to understand, you're saying that supporting this motion does not exclude in-person meetings if we so decided to do that.
I believe we can make a motion in the future to have a one-off in-person meeting any month of the year, as long as we give enough notice. So that's why I think this motion is a good motion, because there seems to be support for virtual access, but interest in in-person meetings. And I think this motion still has a pathway to serve both interests.
Mr. Bovet, does that sound correct to you?
Indeed. Quite frankly, this is procedural. So, I mean, another alternative is to withdraw the motion and just leave it up to the chair, in which case we would just continue having virtual meetings until the chair called for an in-person meeting. That's another alternative as well. Essentially take no action today, and then we'll just proceed on virtual until the chair or the commission changes their mind about a specific meeting. I hope I didn't confuse everybody with that.
Well,
I mean,
you've given us something to think about. I'm inclined to go ahead. Is there anyone who wishes to withdraw this motion, or it would need to be Commissioner Podar, correct?
That's correct.
So if let me ask this, if I withdraw this motion, we just leave it in limbo till whenever?
Yeah, basically we'll just continue doing virtual until you all change your mind.
Great, I withdraw it. Let's leave it in limbo and move on to the next thing.
Well, but another person can make a motion, right?
That's true. Another person can make a motion to I guess it's reconfirming that you'll stay virtual until you change your mind. But yeah, that's kind of what we've been doing now. But
couldn't another person make a motion to have hybrid meetings?
Yeah, that's entirely possible as well. The other thing you want to consider is, who would you want? I guess this would be my question of y'all, because really we're talking about procedure. We're not talking about substance. If you all decide you want to continue to do virtual stuff, which I'm kind of hearing a pretty broad consensus around, what mechanics would you want to have happen to change a meeting to hybrid, being in person with the virtual option? Would you want the chair to have that authority to just do that? Would you want it to come back to the commission for a discussion about that? Would you want to have the chair and the vice chair, for example, as kind of the executive for this, make that decision jointly? I mean, there's a number of mechanisms. So we would just need to know, how would you want that decision to be made? And then we can craft a motion around that if that's what you want to do.
Commissioner Kaiser.
One thought I have procedurally would be to leave it the option with the chair, and then if the chair calls for that meeting for the commission, with a certain number of votes, to override that, to keep it as virtual if necessary. That way the chair has discretion, and the committee could then choose not to follow that direction if it was a majority or 75% vote or whatever it is.
Are you saying the option with respect to specific meetings, or the option as for general
Calling for a
procedure?
specific meeting.
Yeah, specific meeting. Okay. I think Commissioner Fry.
Commissioner Podar was ahead of me there. If she wants to go.
Okay, Commissioner Podar.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. Chair Lockwood, it's been about 30 minutes we've been discussing whether we are going to go virtual or hybrid. And
yes, right.
we have equity on the table right now. We have things. So how do we start simplifying issues so that it's not a headache and cumbersome thing? Any one of us, all 9 of us, any one of us can at any given point of time during a PC dialogue can ask for a in-person meeting. So why should authority lie with any one person? Anyways, if any of us feel that, hey, would all of us like to meet at, say, in May in person? Great, we can vote on it. If somebody wants to say that, hey, I would love to meet all of you in August, we can vote on it. But if we can just let it go and continue virtually, can we just keep things simple going forward for everybody? That would be lovely, because I think we've spent 35 minutes by now discussing this.
Commissioner Fry.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had, well, I mean, I think I would say that I would support having the option open to call for a hybrid meeting. And it's important to continue to remind ourselves that it's hybrid, not mandatory in-person meetings in the future. And having, I'm fine having the chair or vice chair allowed to make that request, because again, we can all still choose to be virtual if we need to in a hybrid format. I did just want to raise one point in question. We were talking a lot about access and equity. And I think in general these days, this type of a format provides that. But I also do want to kind of acknowledge that for some people, actually being able to go in person might be more accessible. And I'm not saying we should change all our meetings to that. I just kind of want to raise that the perspective of the 9 of us might not fully represent the perspective of the broader community in that regard. That said, I'm perfectly happy to sit on my computer and you know, come in on video for all of these meetings.
Mr. Bobette.
And if I could just comment on that comment real quickly, there could be a scenario in which I would affirmatively recommend the chair and or the vice chair call for an in-person meeting based on what Commissioner Fry just said. If we had, for example, an applicant or an opponent that really struggled to be online virtually, you know, I think we would need to make a reasonable accommodation for that. And that could very well be a hybrid meeting where people have the 2 options. So I can see where that might very well occur. But I do want to remind folks, procedurally under Robert's Rules of Order, we have a withdrawn motion for Commissioner Podar, and I forget who seconded it. It's still a live motion because the person who seconded it has to withdraw it as well. So Commissioner Kaiser. Okay, so then now we've got no motion on the table. So if you don't, I guess I'll just say this, if you don't do anything, I think staff's going to continue to schedule things virtually until the chair or the vice chair direct us otherwise. And if you all are happy with that status quo, then I think Commissioner Podar is correct. We've talked about it for 40 minutes and maybe that's the end of that.
Right. So unless there's someone who wants to make a motion for hybrid meetings, I think we are saying we're going to continue virtual, but there could be occasions when a hybrid meeting will be called. I'm not seeing any comments. So I think that's where we are leaving it. And this item came under Planning Commission announcements, so I'll ask if there are any other announcements tonight. Yes, Commissioner Will.
I got an email from the e-government website to complete my SEI filing. So I want to remind everybody to do that. Who also got the email?
I did mine.
That's my announcement.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Commissioner Potter.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. Chair Lockwood, I would like to propose a motion to add an agenda item to the meeting next time is to start discussing stipend options for all planning commissioners serving on the committee. In fact, across the board for Washington County, but definitely since I'm serving on the Planning Commission, because some of our commissions are now getting a stipend, Metro across the board has implemented stipends for all community members serving on committees, because they recognize that otherwise it is exploitative labor. Considering that we've had this discussion also on the phone that about 700,000 people live in this county. And in order to ensure that planning commissioners, all 9 of us, truly represent the interests of all 700,000 people, it will take us a little bit of effort to go out into community and learn and educate and familiarize ourselves with their circumstances, their needs. So that this is a quasi-judicial board, so that if we want to make our commission truly equitable in its approach and in decision making, we must start recognizing the value of time and effort that is required to serve on this commission. Before these meetings, we are required to study and learn about things that we've probably never heard of. And moving forward, if we want other people to serve from different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds to serve on this commission, they will require additional time and effort. So if we start treating people with, if one person in this room is getting paid, everybody should get paid for the time. And stipends are not usually anywhere close to what people deserve. But at least we can start the process. So if we can, I would like to propose a motion to add stipends for planning commissioners to next meeting's agenda. It would be lovely. And of course, we need a second for it.
All right. So just let me be clear, is the motion to add a discussion about stipends? Okay. Mr. Bovet.
Yes, sorry, I forgot to use my words.
Okay.
People might be listening in. So yes, so that we can make sure that we start working with an equity, within an equity framework for county commissions.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Bovet, I'm going to recognize Ms. Wardell. Yes.
Yeah, if I could just weigh in on this, I think this is a really important topic and we should have conversations about it, but this is not something that Planning and Development Services or even Land Use and Transportation can make a decision about. And the Planning Commission doesn't have their own budget to allocate to pay members. The county has many, many volunteer boards. And so I believe this is a conversation that our Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement has had somewhat internally. What I would propose is that staff share with that office that we've heard this concern from our Planning Commission. It was brought up for discussion this evening, and ask them the status of the conversations internally for all of our volunteer boards. I also would propose that we could invite the county's Chief Equity Officer, Latricia Tillman, to attend a future Planning Commission meeting and give an update on the work that her office is doing. And then at that time, she could answer questions from planning commissioners about that work and hear your proposals for some things that they could do.
That sounds like a very sensible plan to me. But we have a motion on the floor. Maybe I shouldn't have even made a comment at that point, but is there a second for the?
Well, if I could,
yes,
sorry,
go ahead.
I have to intervene because it's a procedural matter.
Sure.
So I think what you have here is a motion that's actually not required, and I'll get to the rule here in a minute. And then you have kind of a suggestion from the planning director about how to proceed. So I think, I guess I need to hear from Commissioner Podar about whether she likes what Planning Director Wardell is suggesting as a process to address this issue, because the rule itself, and I'll just read it to you. It says any member of the PC shall have the right to have an item placed on the agenda at any meeting by request to the presiding officer. So it's not really a motion and second type situation. It's a request to the chair to place that on. It's not really a decision for the whole planning commission to make. So the motion is technically kind of out of order because it doesn't go with the rules. So we could add it as a discussion item if the chair is willing, or we could kind of do something along the lines of Planning Director Wardell, which he suggested. I'm kind of wanting to defer back to Commissioner Podar to see what her preference is. Do you want to have it as a discussion item at the next Planning Commission meeting? Do you want to kind of go with what Planning Director Wardell was suggesting, or what's your preference here, I guess?
I would like, thank you. I would like to put it on as a discussion item, because we've had this discussion with county. The Planning Commission, I believe, needs to come together. And if each commission and committee started to talk about it, had a discussion and came to consensus, and we can talk about that, we can send that to the county commissioners that the Planning Commission is requesting for this or asking for this. And that is how it will move forward, because the county has continued to say we are in discussions for the last 2 years about this. So but then when there's one person talking about it, then it only is one person. But if we propose this change as an equity strategy as a planning commission and send it to the county commission, it does definitely sends a message to them that we are serious about this. And so how do we make sure, again, I go back to the fact that as a planning commission and as planning commissioners, while we are discussing land use and everything, we have to ensure that moving forward, we continue to work within an equity framework and start making changes to the Planning Commission from what it has been, to make sure that we are creating a better system and a better committee for future planning commissioners. And we cannot keep waiting. Thanks.
So I understood Mr. Bovet to say that what's happening now is the commissioner has made a request of the chair. So I will address that request. I think that certainly I speak for myself, and maybe I speak for several other commissioners. This is a topic that I think is really important. I have a lot of interest in the ideas that you've brought up. But I do not feel educated at all about the topic. And I don't feel that I could have a sensible conversation about it in a state of pretty near ignorance. So I am attracted by Ms. Wardell's suggestion that we hear from Ms. Tillman as a starting place and go from there, rather than put it on our agenda now as a discussion item, because I'm not sure we can really have a useful discussion. Commissioner Fry.
I think that it would be helpful to kind of hear. I'm new to this whole thing in particular, and then I think it would be helpful for me as well to hear some of what the county is doing and can do, and have that be the start. But I want to also recognize Commissioner Podar and make sure that we have the opportunity to not just have that be where it stops, to still have the opportunity to discuss that. But it would be helpful for me personally to have a little bit of background from the county before we have a discussion. Otherwise, I won't have much to offer.
Any other comments? I saw Commissioner Bito's hand, and then Commissioner Will after that.
If we go that route, can we also ensure that we have some time to have a discussion, ask thoughtful questions? And I think it's important to, provide information. Like, I feel like I could educate myself on this better. I want to learn more about it. But I want to be able to learn from, somebody who has done the research and understands how that will help our commission and other commissions in Washington County be more representative of the general population. And I like the idea of having a presentation, but I also think it's really important to have that conversation component as well.
Commissioner Will.
I was just going to ask if move to close the discussion.
Well, we're not really in a motion setting. It's just a request made by a planning commissioner for an agenda item entry, and I think we're just talking about what that agenda item entry looks like, whether it's a report from Washington County staff, probably not planning commission staff, because as planning director Wardell mentioned, LUT doesn't have the power to do this. So bring in somebody from the county administrator's office and then have a discussion after that. I think that's kind of what we're talking about. But there really isn't a motion to short circuit. It's really the chair who's asking for input.
Okay, so I appreciate that. I guess my I understood is that you directed the chair that the chair can add it to the agenda, and so I would like to recommend the chair make a decision.
Oh yeah, I think I said I wasn't going to put it on the agenda because I thought that was premature. It's a really important topic. I appreciate Commissioner Podar's bringing it up. I think it, yeah, but I don't think we're ready to talk about it just among ourselves. I think we need more education as a group. Commissioner Podar.
Thank you. I should have clarified and added some more that the discussion doesn't necessarily mean that the county is not involved or the county is not part of the discussion. That includes, as I mentioned previously, that the DEI office is not really involved with the Planning Commission at this moment. It would be lovely to hear from them as well, where they are at, and discuss what planning commissioners, even what do they know about it or think about it. That would make them be better representatives of the community. So the item, it's about just a discussion, which definitely is going to be ongoing. But how do we at least place it on the agenda so that we have a placeholder, and either the county comes back to it, or we continue as Commissioner Moribado said, that we must have time for discussion. That discussion element is important, but doesn't mean that starts and closes with just us discussing amongst ourselves. Thanks.
Yeah. Ms. Wardell, would you please get in touch with Ms. Tillman and see how soon she can come and talk to us as a starting point on this?
Yes, we'll try to get that scheduled as soon as she's available.
Are there any other comments? Well, thank you all for all of the discussion tonight. Our next item is adjournment. Is there any objection to adjourning? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.